Awesome. Let's kick off. So, kia ora everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion today, Leading Through Uncertainty. My name is Michael Lovegrove. I'm the founder and CEO of a Kiwi insurtech called Journey, and we're very lucky today to be in the presence of some true insurance legends, who between them have nearly a century of experience. They bring deep insights from all around the world, from the USA, South Africa, Ireland, and the UK, and of course, New Zealand. They have all navigated through uncertain times, such as we are in now, and all have a passion for innovation and technology to bring the industry forward. So I want to introduce each one of them, and in no particular order. First off, we have Glenn Renwick. Glenn was the former CEO of one of the largest auto insurers in America called Progressive. He was with Progressive for 32 years, and for over 16 of those years, he was CEO. He is currently also a director of United Healthcare, the world's largest healthcare company by revenue, and was on the board of global fintech company Fiserv for 19 years. An interesting fact about Glenn, he is originally from Dunedin, and he is one of the very few Kiwis to ever lead a Fortune 500 company. And he has also led through multiple hurricanes, including Katrina, the global financial crisis, and now COVID-19. We also have on the panel John Lyon. Give us a wave, John, who is the CEO of Ando Insurance. John has over 40 years of experience in the insurance industry in Ireland, the UK, and New Zealand, with much of that time spent as CEO, first of Lumley, and now Ando Insurance. John is a past president of the Insurance Council of New Zealand and still sits on the board, and has held a number of other senior executive and governance roles in the industry. And then we also have the fantastic Lyon du Toit, partner from Deloitte, New Zealand. Lyon is a qualified actuary, business leader, and Harvard Business School alumni with more than 20 years of experience in financial services across South Africa. She's served on numerous executive committees and boards and is widely recognized for innovation, leading change, and new business in a large, complex, and established organization. So as the world gets to grips with the new norm that COVID-19 has enforced upon us, the purpose of this chat is to help experienced insurance leaders share their learnings with current CEOs and leaders who are managing insurance companies during COVID-19 and the economic aftermath. So throughout this discussion, feel free to ask any questions, post it in the chat, which you should be able to do at the bottom of your screen, and I'll attempt to pick them up as we go along. So panelists, we're obviously in a very interesting time right now across the whole world, and it's uncharted territory for many, but you've all navigated through uncertain times before. So Glenn, I have a question for you to start with. You were CEO of Progressive during multiple major hurricanes, including Hurricane Katrina. And I can only imagine that must have been pretty massive for one of the largest auto insurers in America and the world. Can you explain some of the issues those incidents created for Progressive?
Sure. And I'll try to weave in a couple of messages that might be of use for others. Two big takeaways. One is when you have an internal crisis, or let's face it, hurricanes are not quite the same as the crisis we may be in now, or even the global financial crisis. They do have an end. We know when they come, when they leave. What's unknown is the disaster and so on and so forth that it creates. So one of the most important things, and it goes for almost any crisis, is real communication, very authentic communication, either to customers, which is more important in this particular case, but oftentimes to your own employees. Really, no one wants spin. I think leaders sometimes have an opportunity to think that maybe they need to be a little paternalistic. That I disagree with. I think people actually see the facts, just tell them what the facts are, and lead in a way that is very comfortable for people to be able to follow. The second is, in a case like a hurricane, and I would say this is true, but it's a different flavor regardless of the crisis, is the job of a leader is also to analyze that, not just for the operational impact, but the second order effect. What might this be as an opportunity to grow our business and to do something that isn't so obvious to others. So, for example, Hurricane Katrina, two things I'll point out. One is that was a real catalyst for us as a company to start realizing this is one place that we were able to get in contact with our customers in a very, very real way, do very real things for them, which is different than the rather passive nature of some forms of insurance. And so we decided to take hurricanes from that point on as a brand defining part of Progressive. So we became extraordinary in data. We would communicate to people before the hurricane ever happened, future hurricanes, what to do, where to do it. We mobilized our own internal structures so that we could really do it without sort of scurrying. We had advanced teams for fuel, for hotels. We made hurricane disasters a science in a sense, and it became a brand defining moment. My third point that I'd make there is that almost all crises create some opportunity for true leadership. In this particular case, I and a few others had a chance to go in with the National Guard right after Katrina had hit, and we realized that it wasn't just water, it was, quite frankly, sewer, water, all sorts of things. So we actually made a decision that day to crush every single vehicle that was flooded in New Orleans. I'll never know whether that cost our shareholders money or whether it actually was incredibly brand enhancing. You can probably make the story either way, but we never took a vehicle, and we're talking thousands of vehicles, out of New Orleans. Subsequently, we grew faster than any other insurance company in New Orleans or in Louisiana. And we were able to attract staff to an industry that didn't always come out of that with a glowing reputation. So my message would be, yes, there's always the operational implications of a crisis, but as leaders, think more broadly about how maybe this defines your company and what are the opportunities for growth. And that's the leader's job, as well as handling the operational implications.
Yeah, so that was really helpful and insightful, I think, Glenn. John, you led Lumley during the GFC, and can you tell me more about some of your experience while you were running Lumley at that point in time?
Sure, and look, just to reinforce what Glenn said there, he makes excellent points around leadership in a crisis. The twist that I'd like to put on it, whether it's GFC or the Canterbury earthquakes or this COVID experience now, is that my insight is that there are two phases to any crisis. There's the easy bit and there's the hard bit. The easy bit is the immediate impact of the crisis, where people are come together as a team, assuming the core culture is good. People come together as a team. They've got a common sense of purpose. There's urgency, clear outcomes. Crisis management kicks in, and people are given specific jobs. And generally speaking, most people I've talked to through this COVID experience say their organizations responded well to that environment, and we've seen that from politicians and elsewhere. That is ultimately the easy bit. That's showing empathy, it's communicating, having a clear plan. The hard bit is the phase we're coming into now, which is the sense of urgency has now gone. We feel like we're on top of the virus, but there's still risk there. But we've got the second wave coming, which is the economic wave, and we've still got people working with restrictions in terms of investment opportunity, restricted salaries in some cases. There's still a lot of risk out there, a lot of uncertainty. And that's the phase when leadership needs to be much more about discipline. And as Glenn absolutely correctly says, about communication. Communication, communication, communication. Know your stakeholders, know what their needs are. Oftentimes, stakeholders might have competing needs, as Glenn alluded to there, the customer need versus the shareholder need. If you've got it right, your stakeholders will be aligned if they're the right value sets across the piece. But ultimately, if you understand your stakeholders, communicate with them effectively, and particularly the important ones, your frontline staff and your customers, and the feedback mechanisms that go with that of getting information back two ways, not just outbound communication, but the sensing and listening skills to understand exactly what's happening. So no matter what the crisis is, split it in those two components, and you need slightly different skill sets for each phase.
That's I mean, even selfishly, that's awesome advice to be able to give, you know, a young CEO and a founder. So if no one else took anything from that, I definitely did. So thank you, John. Leanne, Deloitte is in a unique position as a consultancy, and I guess it sort of has like a bird's eye view of the industry. What are you seeing at the moment in the industry, and what is the most common advice that Deloitte is giving?
I think from an insurance perspective, we have seen that the industry has not been as affected as many of the other industries in New Zealand and the rest of the world. So far we have come off relatively light, especially in New Zealand. But it is definitely going to change as we progress into the next 12 to 18 months. And it's more from an economic perspective than from a claims perspective. And I think the big thing that we're picking up on is that the insurance sector and a lot of our clients in the insurance sector, initially the main focus was a little bit to John's point, manage the crisis, and you focus quite a bit internally. So you focus on your own staff, your own team, getting everyone to work from home, new ways of work, all of those things, and to think about how do you then pivot towards really focusing on the customer. And I think that is actually what we see, that the successful players in the industry are going to be the ones that focus the most on the customer and how their lives have changed and how their lives are changing, because their insurance needs, whether it's in the general space or in the life insurance or disability or mental health space, is going to be quite different over the next 18 months to what it was in the past. And we do see that across the industry and even globally, that how the insurance players pivot towards that. And even linking a bit to the industry that you're in, Michael, around how we support customers more in the digital space. They have got used to engaging more digitally now. So now is a good time to allow for different ways of engaging with customers in the future than in the past. So focusing both on their actual needs as well as how we engage with them on those needs.
Awesome. I know we've kind of touched on this already, but I want to dive into this a little bit more. And this is a question for you all. So during uncertain times, what's the most important trait that makes a good leader? We talked about communication. Is there anything else that you think that is just pivotal to leadership during times of uncertainty?
I'll offer you two things. There's probably a lot that we can actually put relative to characteristics of the leader, but maybe two tools that listeners might find useful. One is sort of right now, and that is what I'll call scenario planning. Too often we think there is one mainstream line of thinking, and all actions seem to relate to that mainstream. It's really a leader's job to think about or almost expect the unexpected. All right, and maybe that's a good thing just to jot down, because if you went through the global financial crisis, there were a good number of things that we simply didn't expect even after we saw the early stages. But scenario planning, and I'll give you an example of something I've been doing as a board member with United, doesn't make me special. I'm encouraging the management team to really think through different operating scenarios, i.e., there is no vaccine. What does that mean? There is a vaccine, but it has, like the influenza, has to be reapplied injected every year. And in the billions of doses, what are the logistics for something like that? Now, I'll not go through many more scenarios. And you don't need 15, but 3 or 4 that at least create a spectrum of outcomes that are not predictions. They are simply not non-zero possibilities. And from those scenarios, then a leader can start assigning some responsibilities for things like capital management. All right, not just negative capital management, i.e. what might we need for operational requirements, but there'll be opportunities. And this is probably one of my key messages to leaders in a crisis. There are always opportunities. They're easy to see in hindsight. Your job is to try to sort of wrestle with them as they're emerging. but there will be opportunities for acquisitions. So what kind of capital might you want to have on hand, given different operating scenarios and ones that maybe others hadn't planned for? So just that whole notion of scenario planning, write down a few rational scenarios, get some other people involved if necessary. Don't be dreaming about, unrealistic things, but definitely stretch the boundaries. The second would be at the other end, coming out of a crisis. It's really a good practice to do an after-action review. Take a look at your disaster recovery plans. What went well? What didn't go well? What was the implication of people working from home? Yes, we had that right, but we didn't have home delivery of PCs very accurately defined. Whatever the case might be, and while I've got the mic, I'll do one more thing since it's insurance. Use every opportunity as a data collection opportunity. We may never see that same crisis again, but really analyze what the frequency and severity of claims might be, if it's insurance, and be able to use that as a basis to infer for other situations. So don't assume that it's a one and done crisis. There's always data there that can be very valuable. And for most businesses today, data is gold. So don't leave it lying there, pick it up, and one day it may come in useful. A couple of thoughts.
Yeah, I think,
that's awesome.
Glenn, you've made some really great points there, but there maybe one or two others to add, because I fully agree with everything there, but maybe just from a leadership perspective as well, if you think about it from a staff perspective, you mentioned some really good things about communication as well, but being visible and being present with your staff. They're going through a lot of uncertainty. So if there's a situation that you can't be face-to-face, make sure there's Zoom video discussions or even telephone discussions, whatever, but to be present and visible with staff through uncertainty is quite a big one. And also to be real and authentic, because you mentioned it right at the beginning as well. You can't actually have all the answers, and you can't give people guarantees that everyone will still have their jobs a year from today or things are going to be fine. We just navigate the uncertainty together, and we'll find the right solutions to the challenges, but to be authentic. And think the authenticity of leadership is quite important at this point in time.
All absolutely spot on points there from both Glenn and Lyon. Another observation is around leadership styles. And a lot of us that read articles on leadership talk about level 5 leadership, being consultative, hearing people, all that sort of stuff. Leadership is ultimately situational, and sometimes people don't want to be asked what they think they should do. They want to be told what to do. And in a crisis, particularly the early stages, it's very important to be as directive as possible to give clarity without becoming a complete autocrat. But finding adjusting your leadership style to the particular environment is very important. So if you're trying to bring about culture change in an organization, then you have to be more visionary and more consultative. If you're dealing with a crisis, then you need to be more directive. And there's a whole bunch of different facets of leadership you could apply at different times. So being very clear and intentional about what your leadership style is. And the important thing is, don't just spring it on people. Tell people, we're now in a crisis, I'm going to be more directive. That actually sets the tone so people aren't surprised by your particular style. Mm. The second important thing, and it reinforces what Glenn was saying about the review and the planning, a good crisis management happens well in advance. You cannot create a good culture in a crisis. You have to create a good culture well in advance of a crisis happening. You have to have your technology prepared. You've got to have your systems and processes prepared. The more prepared you are in advance, the better you will be able to manage in a crisis. A crisis can help reinforce the culture, and it can help reinforce your technology strategies and so forth. But the planning ahead and the review of test cases and real cases is absolutely crucial to making sure you get it right next time.
That leads really nicely into this next question that I have.
Michael, could I just add a couple of thoughts there just on the communication from past
Absolutely.
experience? if you're out there dealing with it, try to link your communication to the values of the company and your mission and objectives or vision, whatever it might be. Try to make this a real cultural credibility test and lead with those things so that while they've been out there, they may not have been called on in the same way as they are in a crisis. So try to use those. Just a second quick point, and these are just picked up from the other speakers. Remember, as leaders, there's no such thing as a void. If you don't communicate on something, don't assume there'll be a void. It'll get filled. It'll get filled with rumors. You just won't control how it's filled. So to Leanne's point of be authentic, I used to say quite regularly, I'll answer any question as long as you'll accept I don't know as an answer. And occasionally, I may not be able to tell you, and that would be something that's more sensitive for SEC or whatever it might have been. And I know we're in the crisis now, but lessons learned for going forward, for those with longer careers, is you've got to start communicating consistently, authentically, well in advance of a crisis, so that you build that credibility to be just as credible delivering bad news as good news.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that input. That actually leads really nicely into this next question, which I have for everyone again, is what's more important during a crisis? Is it inspiring leadership or is it effective management?
I think it goes back to what Glenn was saying and Leanne, authenticity, communication, filling the void. I think leadership is critical, but you cannot be an effective leader if you don't have good management. You need to get both working in harmony, and that's one of the things that I think one needs to take out of separate the reality from the clickbait. There are no quick ways to become a good leader. It takes, and there's no one thing that's going to change your leadership style. Leadership is a whole range, a kaleidoscope of disciplines and behaviors and learnings and experiences that's built up over time. And to be trusted as a leader, you need to be consistent, and you do need to have good management skills. If you don't have certain skills, then surround yourself with people who have those skills, and make it clear what the roles and clarity of those roles are around you. But yeah, I would say both are important. To get the immediate impact, you need a strong leadership to give assurance and create the trust, but then you need to be good at actually execution as well.
Need to be the whole package.
Always.
Yeah, but you also don't need to do that alone. And I think that's one of the big learnings is you are the leader of whatever you're busy with, whether it's running a whole organization or a small team. But you also usually have people around you. And some people are very good at operationally getting things done and managing the business, and others are really good at inspiring people around them and sharing the vision, the culture, the values, and where you're going. You may not have it all, and you might be slightly better at one part of that than the other one, and that's where people around you should fill up the voids and complement each other. Yeah,
I think that's a really important thing, actually, Leanne, that you should be comfortable handing the reins over to someone else to do something, one of those other, say, the sides of the coin. Like, you need to have those people that complement you around you, so that collectively you can be far better than any one individually. Sorry, Glenn, you're going to add something in.
I think all the great points have been made. I would go back to Leanne's point earlier. Be visible. The one thing I found over years, and I'm sure I didn't get it right early in my career, is that you somehow feel as the leader and the anointed position you're in or whatever, that you're supposed to have all the answers. People actually don't expect that of you. What they expect is that you'll be genuine and just tell it the way it is. Don't try to spin it in a way that gets you through the day or gets you through an awkward question or whatever it might be. Just be real. And that's a course of action that you never have to go back and sort of say, well, what did I say then? And so on and so forth. So just a lot of enthusiasm for people not necessarily shouldering everything, as the others have said, but just calling it the way it is and being consistent, not a one and done. Communicate for as long as necessary, probably all the time, about going into something, managing through it, and then coming out the other side, why you see things that maybe others don't. And remember, the difference between sort of a good leader and an average leader, people just want to follow you. And you think about people you want to follow. So set the example that you have people wanting to follow you. And one last point, as you communicate to employees, so we'll say the word that sometimes we resist, and that is we may need to downsize or lay people off or whatever. Communicate to every employee, even if it's possible that they will be downsized, as if you want to rehire them again later. So it costs a lot of money to hire people. If the worst situation is you have to let them go, make sure they want to enthusiastically come back. And I did have a situation like that. I won't go into details on that now, but we were able to get over 40% of the people that actually laid off to come back when our situation had changed a couple of years later. That's a lot cheaper hiring and a lot more committed people to your culture if they've gone through the bad with you, if they knew it was something exogenous that caused the problem in the first place.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. I think that hopefully everyone who's listening today takes away with them. John, I have another question for you. After the acquisition of Lumley, you started Ando with some of your ex-colleagues from Lumley. With any startup, there are bumps in the road. And how did you build resilience within that team while also managing really fast growth?
Yeah, I looked at this was when I reflect on our journey over the last 5 years now. The bit that I'm most disappointed with was our failure to put adequate support in place for some of our people who, for long periods of time, were working at breakneck speed in very challenging and stressful situations. So it is very difficult. When I reflect back on sort of the health impact and relationship impact and a whole bunch of other things that our team in the early days particularly struggled with, it's to some extent it's a natural consequence of building a business from scratch at pace and trying to keep ahead of the cash flow curve, try to balance all the trade-offs that are necessary to get a business established. But the lessons we learned over time was that communication and support is critically important. We're now, I believe, much better at managing well-being, and we've got a whole bunch of programs in place to support mental health, to help people through challenges. And part of our drive towards being good at that now was learning the lessons from the past. But the best way to do it is communication, is by being close to your team, listening to them, getting genuine feedback on what's happening, and trying to be more disciplined about not trying to do too much. The problem is when you've got a group of people together who are often, say in our case, in the early days, all shareholders in the business, everybody's got a commercial interest, everybody's fired up about the vision and the opportunity. And it's not that we were asking people to work harder, people wanted to work harder and longer hours, and you get stress is an insidious affliction in that it sneaks up on you and you don't actually know that you've got it until you look back and see, shit, that was an awful time. You gradually slip into a way of thinking. So having people from outside who can call it and have the conversations and then put in place the obvious things like making sure you take breaks, exercise, diet, avoiding alcohol and other stuff that might be a short-term comfort. So there's lots of lessons learned about how you do it, but the single most important thing is communication. making sure that you talk to your people about prioritization, about resourcing. If you can't get the adequate resources, then you have to slow things down. And that is sometimes hard, particularly when your neck is on the line.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, John. Leanne, you've worked in, leadership positions in both South Africa and New Zealand. Have you seen a difference in, South African culture and New Zealand or Aotearoa culture when it comes to resilience?
Well, I think in South Africa, there's been quite a few crises. So we often have this never waste a good crisis situation. So there's a lot of resilience there. I think you almost you never have a day that isn't a challenge in South Africa, and leadership there has been quite a big thing. Unfortunately, you don't always have the best leaders as examples, and even across different parts of the public sector and private sector. So, but the ones that are good examples are the ones that really pivot towards what the customer needs and also to what their staff needs. And the resilience there is also around being agile and flexible to the adapting environment. So I think something that I saw a lot of similarities between New Zealand and South Africa is actually how quickly we are agile and we adapt to new situations. If I just look at how we quickly adapted to a current level 4 world, and then a level 3 world, and then a level 2 back to level 1, and how New Zealanders are thinking differently about how we engage at work with each other, etc. And that's typically what I've also seen in South Africa, is to pivot quickly towards a new normal and take the good stuff from what changed and let go of the bad stuff and just figure out which one's the best one to stick with.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. Glenn, you've spoken a lot about making sure that you communicate, making sure that you're authentic. Is there anything in addition to that you think is really necessary to build resilience within your teams during uncertain times?
If you don't mind, I'll take that into long-term resilience, and that will reinforce a point I made earlier about also looking to crises to be creations of opportunities. I'll give one quick example, and remember this is in the 80s, so long before the kind of technology that we're all totally wed to now. In California, they created a proposition that effectively was going to put insurance profits as a thing of the past, at least in our industry. 23% of our entire company at that time was in California. That might not seem like a crisis to you, but for me, that was a crisis. If you lose that kind of revenue and you really have no ability to operate in the biggest single market. Ralph Nader had led a proposition that consumers clearly would support. And it was all around the fact that there was no competition in the insurance industry. Ralph has become a good friend. And at that time, I've explained to him there were over 3,000 companies writing auto insurance. So he had the problem sort of right, and the solution, in my mind, not surprisingly, wrong. So we used that as a way to create a price comparison service. And again, that's why I say the 80s, because they're more common today. And that became brand defining for Progressive. And probably, well, more than probably, it is the single biggest brand defining element of a company that has gone from what was then $1 billion-ish to over $40 billion. And people still associate that kind of transparency. And we've talked a lot about communications, just another spin on it. So we became, instead of a very, at the time, threatened company, losing 23% of our revenue stream was likely to put us out of business. We took a shot at doing something that was quite radical, not well accepted by our friends in the industry, and ultimately it redefined the company to go on to be extraordinarily successful. So in that form of a resilience, I just want people to recognize that deal with the today, you have to, that's your job. But look for opportunities that might be brand defining by doing what Leanne has sort of mentioned several times, trying to see things from the customer perspective, not the inside out, but rather the outside in. And it may mean that you have to do something a little more radical than you would in normal operating scenarios. We don't like to admit that, but frankly, a crisis sometimes brings a willingness to do things that you might not otherwise do. Well, try to put the wolf at the door yourself, if you can, by using this crisis to look long and hard about products, product features, things that might be consumer responsive and may have a long shelf life versus just the instantaneous resolution. So that's just a different look at resilience.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to what Glenn's just said, is that thinking about what got you to this point in the past and what made you really successful, given this change, is not what will get you to be really successful in the future. So a very different way to think about your product strategy, your distribution strategy, your marketing strategy, who your customer really is. All of those things may change, and how you work with your staff given this pivot. So just thinking that you've done really well in the past and you're all good might not be the best approach. And I think, Glenn, you've touched on quite a few changes that you need to think about long term as a result.
Yeah, cheers for that, team. One of the awesome things about this webinar is that we have three really experienced insurance minds that you're broadcasting knowledge to everyone that's listening today, and for everyone who listens to this recording thereafter. And one of the things that I think is really valuable is learning from the mistakes of those that we really admire, like you three. And so I'm really keen to understand, I think other people will be as well, really keen to understand maybe some of the mistakes that you have made while you're leading through times of uncertainty, and after you've made those mistakes, how you've gone about trying to fix them. John, I'll throw the mic to you to start that off.
Sure. Look, if I was to list all my mistakes, we'd be using up the rest of the webinar time and all afternoon. Mistakes are essential. If you're not pushing the boundaries, then you won't make mistakes. So you've got to make them. And the key thing is to make sure that the mistakes you make are ones you're happy to live with. Look, there's no single event that comes to mind straight away. I suppose one of it was a mistake. You could call it a mistake, but one of the defining experiences for me was I went in to run Lumley as CEO in, I think, about 2008, and we spent 5-6 years transforming the company, building the team, changing the culture, going through a lot of hard work, full refresh of technology, managing the earthquake scenario, doing a whole bunch of things. And then our parent company decided to get out of insurance, and the business was put up for sale. So having built a wonderful culture with 700 people, I was then in a position of having to tell those people that the business was being sold, and ultimately was bought by IAG. And what that reinforced for me is that you got to be clear about what's important to you. For me, the team culture and having the trust of my team and building a great team around me is critical. If you don't have control over your own destiny, you've got to learn how to live with that. And one of the reasons I started this business was because I wanted to have control over my own destiny and to have as much control as I could over the destiny of those people who are loyal to me and have elected to put their trust in me for their careers and their livelihoods. So to me, that wasn't necessarily a mistake doing all that work at Lumley. It was a wonderful experience in its own right, but the lesson I took from that was to try and control my own destiny. And if anything does happen in the future, I will be able to influence the outcome of those people around me to make it a better experience than it was the last time.
Awesome. Leanne, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think to John's point, there are many, and I just love learning from my own mistakes and many other people's too, if I can. But I think one example that might be quite topical right now is I was asked to head up the digital and direct business of our organization in South Africa. And that business was mainly focusing on brokers and financial advisors. Up until that point, there was no direct link to the customer. And my first approach was to almost be in competition with the advisors and with the face-to-face advisor channel that we had, and build this business in, like, it's either face-to-face or it's digital and direct. And after a period of time, got to the realization that the more value was in integrating the two worlds and actually having an and situation and starting with the customer first. It was evident that the customer often does need face-to-face advice, and sometimes you can do things direct. And he probably, because we're a holistic, we did everything: healthcare, life insurance, investments, and general insurance. So if you look at that package, sometimes you need to see someone, and sometimes you need to just do something over the phone. And when I realized that it's not about competing with what made this company so successful in the past, it's actually integrating those two worlds. We actually started to get real success by putting those two worlds together and making it a partnership approach through an omni-channel strategy rather than two separate strategies. So that was quite a key learning for me.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Let me just add a couple of quick specifics. In one case, not necessarily a mistake, but an 11th hour correction because of what would have turned out to be more of a mistake. And it involved that situation where we had lost a significant part of our business and ongoing. So we had to lay off several thousand people. And and I'll call it a management team versus a leadership team here. I'll take full responsibility. Management team, we had these layoffs down to a science. We knew 3 waves and who, when, what, and how the communication. I'll fly from this place to another place, so on and so forth. And it was like a military exercise. I was working very late and overheard some of our call centers, which are 24 hours. What I thought was a comment that was on the lines of, I wish they would just ask us. And you keep always asking the question during life, who are they? And sometimes you find out you are they. And I don't quite know what they meant, but I called off our plans at the 11th hour and went out to employees and said, here's what's going to happen. Why don't you tell us about your situation, because we have the opportunity to go in waves and create tranches of people to be laid off and so on and so forth. They all knew it was going to happen. What happened is we got through 1.5 waves, there's 3 in total, on all voluntary timing. I got notes that said, gee, I was thinking of going back to school. My husband and I were going to start a small business, etc., and so on and so forth. Thousands of, I'll share a job with Sue. Things that we could never have put into our management plans. And there was a great statistician called Edwards Deming, well known for quality control. And he always preached, get all the data. And so my mistake was I had 95% of the data, or I thought 100. And that other 5% really dictated an ability to do the same thing, but in a better way, by not being afraid to actually treat people as adults. And ask them, it's going to happen. How would you like it to happen? Second is a little bit of a different crisis. It was a branding issue, and I just want to reinforce some of the brand implications of dealing through crises, where in this case, we, and I'll take responsibility, made a decision to take our brand and create 2 brands, primarily in retrospect to suit our internal organization, not the customer.
Yeah.
And that was unquestionably a mistake we reversed a year later with very open mea culpa, which was probably did as much for the brand as destroying it in the first place. But one of the things I just point out, regardless of what the crisis is, self-made, imposed, whatever it might be, and we have a lot of examples during this COVID situation, brands are so hard to build, and that's one block at a time. It's expensive with the kind of media outlets we have today, but they are so quickly destroyed. And it just has to be a variable in the leadership thinking. And there is never a formula that balances out customer, employee, shareholders, capital management, brand, but it's your job to try and think through all of those things that you have the best possible outcome and the best possible company going forward. So don't minimize brand in your decision making is my primary message.
Yeah, and that's That's super valuable. So thank you for that, Glenn. We've just had a really interesting question in from the attendees today, and it's from Olivia. Olivia is asking, as a young insurance professional, what would you say are the key skills that the next generation need in order to positively shape the industry?
Maybe I can start. I think one massive skill is collaboration and teamwork, because no one's got all the answers. The industry and the customer and technology is becoming increasingly complex. Doesn't matter what your role is, you're going to have to understand some level of technology as an example, and you're going to have to understand how that's impacting customer trends and a few other things. So understanding who you need to collaborate with and who you need to work with across different teams. You're not going to have all the answers, but someone that you know, or someone in your team, someone in your division, someone outside of your business will know. And when I talk about collaboration, it's not just internal to your own organization. I think extending it wider and having cross-business collaborations is also quite an important theme. Maybe a second one, and then I'll leave it over to John and Glenn, is around taking what people with many years of experience have got, learning from that, but then bringing in some fresh energy. And if you can use both, then you're actually getting to what the next generation needs to bring to this industry, because we need fresh energy, we need fresh ideas, but also there's a lot of history that you can actually learn from. Bring those two worlds together.
Awesome. I think that's really sound advice. John and Glenn, do you have anything to add to that?
Look, I think that there's a whole bunch of specific skill sets that people can look to. I mean, I think the fear a lot of people have is that the robots will take over, and Michael, you might be responsible for some of that. But what jobs are actually going to be around in the future? I think there are huge opportunities in the insurance sector for people who have the right skill set, the right attitude. The industry remains one that is relatively untouched in some ways by good process and good customer experience. I think we're getting better, but there's huge opportunity for change in this industry, and lots of opportunities for people to influence good outcomes. What those skill sets are, that they will evolve over time, but process skills, as Leanne says, collaboration, anything to do with data, BI, numeracy skills are going to be increasingly important. There's I think there's no one set of skills, because it's going to evolve over time. But you've got to keep learning, looking over your shoulder to see how do you actually add value, where do you want your career to go. Interpersonal skills are always going to be there, influencing skills. But some of the old world technical skills maybe over time will be automated. And my sense is that the wave of automation is going to come a lot more quickly now, post-COVID, because we've all seen what's happened to offshored call centers that have been closed down at the same time as local offices have closed down. So my sense is that those companies that rely on offshore productivity will want to fast track automation, because that's going to be a lot easier to manage in a future environment like the one we just experienced. So I think the pace of change is going to speed up.
Awesome. And Glenn, do you have anything to add to that?
Just a couple of quick ones, and they really just build on Leanne and John's comments. If I was just being specific on skills, I might say big data skills in general. So the influences and inferences are really hard to find above and beyond what's known, but big data skills can bring that out. But the second I would say, and this is a strong encouragement, it's a softer skill, but intellectual curiosity. As John was saying, process opportunities exist in abundance in the insurance industry. I agree with that. Whether we like to admit it or not, and I'll admit it for myself, not others, you become a little more biased over time to the environment you've lived in. And there's nothing like being new. And there are ways to go about being curious. And if you're just haphazard about it, you're not going to get very far. But if you're intellectually curious, and you have the analytical skills or can team up with somebody to do some controlled experiments, put together really intelligent thesis, get more support internally, that's a skill set that's really valued. And if you use the consumer as the primary driving force for your intellectual curiosity, there are a lot of elements of insurance that you sort of say, tell me again why that existed. And if you go far enough back, you find it was constrained by the technology of the day, or it wasn't necessarily all that scientific in the first place. So there's a lot of opportunities to rethink insurance. And I would encourage young people to not necessarily adapt everything that's there, learn it and appreciate what's there, but be curious about what could be there.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Glenn. We've had a really interesting question come in from Jason Roberts, actually. And what he's saying is that he's concerned that as a sector, we're siloing our responses. So insurers are siloing their particular responses to, I guess, managing through uncertainty, that being COVID-19. And he gave the example of IAG closing 53 or proposing to close 53 retail outlets. So Jason's question is, there is an urgency for cross-sector collaboration and leadership insights to make sure that we get the best fit for both customers and insurers. Do any of the panelists have any thoughts there?
I think also linking to his question around allowing for digital transformation and keeping the customer close. The one point, it's partly answering his question, but it's linking to the point about, is the customer ready for this transformation? So if you go too fast, the customers won't be ready to actually adopt the new way of engaging and the new way of whatever you're going to change in your product and your distribution and your engaging strategy. We have mentioned COVID is giving us an opportunity. A lot more people, including my grandparents, even are on Zoom these days. So you are going to get a bit more digital engagement than you did even 2 years ago. But whatever you do as a business, don't go that fast that you leave your customer behind. And that's maybe where the cross-sector collaboration is in the example I had earlier of actually working with the face-to-face advisors as well. And they can also engage digitally, but they have a specific role to play. So maybe not closing all your retail outlets or closing all your bricks and mortar, but keeping some of that open and still engaging with the best of both worlds if that's possible. So that is the cross-sector collaboration and cross-industry collaboration needed as well.
Awesome. Just in the interest of time, I think it's really important that we go through this last particular question that I have written down, and that is for all of the panelists. If you could pick one thing that you wish you had known back when times got heated, back in other times when you led through uncertainty, what would that be? Who wants to start?
I'll kick it off while the others are thinking. To me, I probably wouldn't look back. I think I'd turn the question around and say, what's the one thing I'd like to know now about what the next 12 months or 18 months is going to bring? And I think that's the challenge for us at the moment, is trying to predict where things are going to go, particularly from an economic point of view, but also you look at the reinsurance markets. I was on a webinar last night out of London talking about the impacts of the COVID environment on the reinsurance markets, and this being a $70 billion event, a $200 billion impact on the reinsurance markets if you include asset deterioration on the back of bonds and equity markets being impacted. This is a huge event globally that is going to impact our sector. And even though we're somewhat insulated in the insurance world because we're not like bars and gyms and other things, we're not as discretionary a spend as some areas, and customers still have to buy insurance. So we're somewhat insulated from an economic downturn, but not completely so. And the margins are going to be fine. If unemployment stays at 8%, then we're probably going to be reasonably okay as an economy, and we might bounce back. If unemployment stretches out to 12, 14%, there's going to be a lot of challenges, and this whole thing is going to be stretched out a lot more. So there's a whole bunch of uncertainty coming our way. And I think it goes back to what Glenn was saying, map out your scenarios, understand worst case, best case, what are all these stages in between, and regularly review, sense, adjust, respond, get your information systems working. And so whilst you don't have a crystal ball, if you can make certain assumptions about broad trends and then refine those as you go, you find a way of charting a way through future uncertainty.
Awesome.
I would really not add anything new there, but just reinforce, because I don't know the audience and their leadership responsibilities, but just reinforce something that I said earlier, the scenarios, John's just referenced it. I didn't think like that as a new leader, and I felt a little bit more operationally inclined to deal with the situation as it presented itself. Now I would encourage leaders to make sure they do those scenario plans. They allocate certain responsibilities to their team, and they leave enough opportunity for them to think about other implications. Positive, how might this turn into an opportunity for us? But also plan Bs for situations. For example, I had to find a friendly source of equity should it be needed in the global financial crisis. It wasn't, and it was probably really a plan D. We really weren't in trouble, but if I wasn't thinking about that, who was? So I think to make sure that the leader also allows themselves a little bit of space to be thinking about things that no one else will, vis-a-vis those scenarios. And I just reinforce something that John really hit on very, very well. And that is to you all and to the people around you, take care of yourselves. Stress can be insidious in the sense you don't really see it and know it. I don't know what take care of yourselves means, whether it's health, faith, whatever it might be, but you choose, but take care of yourself, especially in a crisis.
Awesome. Thanks, Glenn. And Leanne?
Well, that said everything. So I'm just going to have a short and snappy one. Take people with you. So just make sure that as you go through this high level of uncertainty and a crisis, you might be in a different space than the people around you. And it's not only your staff members, it's also your family and your friends and everyone else. Take people with you on this journey. Stay close. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just to reinforce that, I think I'm very lucky to have a great team of people around me. Leadership is not a singular game. It's about creating a team environment and having people around you, particularly people who are happy to challenge you. You don't want to have a whole bunch of yes people around you. So I'm lucky that I've got people who tell me when I'm straying from the path, and I think that's critically important.
Yeah, awesome. Today's been great. I mean, if I've gotten so much information and knowledge out of this last hour. So thank you, John, Leanne, and Glenn, for your time today. And thank you to all the attendees that tuned in as well. This will be a recording that we'll be able to publish later on. Hope everyone has a wonderful day and that you manage uncertainty in the best way possible. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.